The Eastern Front, 1943. A frozen trench somewhere near the Taman Peninsula. A German replacement, barely 18, shivers, his breath pluming. He's listening to the distant, rhythmic thunder of Soviet artillery. Above, the sky is a vast, frozen black. Quiet, a veteran Oberleutnant mutters, sharing a cigarette. Too quiet. The new recruit nods, gripping his rifle. At least there are no bombers, Herr Leutnant. Not tonight. The veteran smirks. You learn to hate the quiet boy. You hear the P-2 bombers long before they're on you. Engines like thunder. Plenty of time to hide. It's the other ones you must fear. The recruit looks confused. Other ones? The veteran's smile vanishes. He listens, head tilted. The artillery has paused. The silence is absolute. And then, from the blackness directly above, comes a sound. It's not an engine. It's a soft, whispering whoosh. Like wind rushing through a canvas sail. Like a broomstick cutting the air. The veteran's eyes widen in terror. Gas! He screams, but it's not a gas attack. It's a reflex. He dives for the dugout, dragging the recruit. Nachthexen, sie sind hier! The night witches are here. A moment later, the world erupts. Not in one massive ground-shaking blast, but in series of precise, rapid-fire explosions. A pop-pop-pop that seems to walk directly along the trench line. A fuel dump erupts in a column of fire 50 meters away. The command bunker vanishes. Then the dugout next to theirs collapses, silencing the screams from within. As the recruit huddles, shaking, he hears the sound again. This time, it's the thin, popping rattle of an underpowered engine after the bombs have hit. The sound is moving away from them, climbing back into the black. The veteran is clutching a crucifix, his face pale in the light of the burning fuel. They see in the dark, he whispers, a statement of fact, not superstition. They turn off their engines, they fall on you like ghosts, and they are all women. For the German Wehrmacht, the most technologically advanced, terrifying military machine on Earth, their most psychologically devastating enemy was not the T-34 tank. It was not the Katyushan rocket. It was a group of women, most barely 20 years old, flying obsolete two-seater biplanes made of plywood and fabric, with no radios, no radar, no parachutes, and no defense. This is the story of how they turned a crop duster into Hitler's nightmare. To understand the Night Witches, one must first understand the sheer desperation of 1941. Operation Barbarossa was not a battle. It was an apocalypse. The Wehrmacht had shattered the Red Army, advancing hundreds of miles in weeks. Soviet forces were collapsing, the nation on the brink of non-existence. In this existential crisis, the Soviet Union did something no other nation in history had dared. It officially mobilized its women for combat roles. The architect of this revolution was a woman named Marina Ryzhkova. She was, quite simply, a legend. Known as the Soviet Amelia Earhart, she was a record-setting aviator, a national hero, and a powerful speaker. As the German war machine ground towards Moscow, Ryzhkova was flooded with thousands of letters from young women across the Union. They were not asking for nursing roles. They wanted to fly. They wanted to fight. As one pilot, Nina Respopova, later said, "How could we sleep? How could we live when the enemy was bombing our cities, killing our people?" Ryzhkova took this demand directly to Joseph Stalin. The male military command was appalled. The idea of women in combat cockpits was seen as propaganda, a joke, or worse, a waste of good equipment. They argued women lacked the temperament, the strength, and the killer instinct. They were a liability.
But Rezkova was persuasive, and Stalin was pragmatic. He was losing thousands of pilots and planes. He needed bodies. On October 8, 1941, Stalin signed Order 0099, authorizing the creation of 3 all-female air regiments. This was a world first. Not just a few women integrated into male units, 3 entire regiments, where every pilot, every navigator, every mechanic, every armorer would be a woman. Rezkova was given command of this experimental division. The elite women, those with the most experience, were assigned to the 586th Fighter Regiment, receiving the best Yak-1 fighters. The 587th Bomber Regiment received the advanced PE-2 dive bomber. And then there was the 588th. This regiment was considered the leftovers, the unlucky ones. They were the youngest, the least experienced. Many were students from universities, pilots from civilian flying clubs who had barely 100 hours of flight time. Their designated role was Night Harassment Bomber Regiment. They were sent to a small frozen training field in the town of Engels. Their commander was a woman named Yevdokia Beshanskaya. She was a strict, no-nonsense disciplinarian who, at 28, was considered an old woman by her recruits, who called her Milochka, little dear, behind her back. These young women, Klavdia, Yevgenia, Nadezhda, Tatiana, arrived in ill-fitting male uniforms, their boots stuffed with newspaper to fit. They were ecstatic. They believed they were fulfilling their patriotic duty, that they would be given powerful, modern machines to strike back at the fascists. When then they saw their airplanes, the excitement died. It was replaced by a cold, stunned silence. What stood on the airfield was not a weapon of war. It was a Polikarpov Po-2, a kukuruznik, a machine designed in 1928, not for combat, but for training, mail delivery, and crop dusting. It was, by every military standard of 1942, a joke, and it would become their only weapon.
The German military was built on technological terror. The Messerschmitt Bf 109, the Focke-Wulf 190, the Junkers U-88. These were the most advanced killing machines in the sky, flown by Luftwaffe aces who counted their victories in the dozens, sometimes hundreds. The 588th Regiment was given a biplane. Let us be clear about what the Polikarpov Po-2 was. It was a biplane, meaning it had 2 sets of wings, one stacked on top of the other, held together by wooden struts and wire. The entire fuselage was a skeleton of wood covered by a thin skin of doped fabric. It was literally a kite with an engine. The cockpit was completely open to the elements. The pilot and navigator sat one behind the other, exposed to the sub-zero temperatures of the Russian night, the wind, the snow, the rain. Their only advanced instrument was a stopwatch. The engine was a 5-cylinder radial engine that produced a pathetic 110 horsepower. This gave the Po-2 a top speed of 94 miles per hour. 152 kilometers per hour, on a dive. Its cruising speed was a laughable 70 miles per hour, 110 kilometers per hour. This single fact is the key to understanding everything that followed. The Po-2's top speed was slower than the stall speed of the primary German fighters. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 literally could not fly slow enough to get behind a Po-2 and shoot it down. To even try, the German ace would have to deploy his flaps, slow his engine to idle, and risk stalling his own multi-million Reichsmark aircraft, sending him into an unrecoverable spin. The Po-2, meanwhile, could turn on a dime, practically pivoting in the air. The Po-2 was a tactical impossibility. It defied all known principles of aerial dogfighting. It was a mosquito in a world of eagles. The plane had no radio. Communication with the ground or with other planes was impossible. It had no defensive armament, no rear gunner to fire back at an attacker. The women were sent into combat utterly defenseless. It had no radar. Navigation was purely visual. The navigator, a 19-year-old girl, sat in the front cockpit with a map on her lap, a pencil, and a flashlight. She had to find a specific German trench in total darkness, in bad weather, hundreds of miles inside enemy territory, by comparing the map on her knee to the blacked-out landscape below. And finally, the 588th Regiment flew without parachutes. This has become a core part of their legend. German intelligence, when they learned of this, assumed it was a fanatical, suicidal order from Stalin. The truth was simpler and more telling. The Po-2 could barely get off the ground with its tiny engine, 2 pilots, and a full load of bombs. Parachutes were heavy. They weighed 20 kilograms. The women quickly did the math. 20 kilograms was the weight of 2 more bombs. They unanimously chose the bombs. They named their planes Swallows, but the Germans would soon give them a different name. The plane had one final defining characteristic. The engine made a low, idling pop, pop, pop sound. To the German soldiers cowering in their trenches, it sounded like a witch's broomstick sweeping through the night sky. They called them the Nachthexen, the night witches. This flying coffin, this sewing machine, as the male pilots called it, was a death trap. Any single tracer bullet, a common round in all German aircraft, would ignite the fabric, skin, and plywood frame instantly. The plane wouldn't just crash, it would disintegrate in a ball of fire. The women understood this. They understood they were flying the most flammable, slowest, most defenseless aircraft on the entire Eastern Front. And so with this understanding, they invented a new way to fight. They weaponized the plane's weaknesses. They weaponized the dark, and they weaponized fear. The 588th was a harassment regiment. Their job wasn't to win the war in a single blow. Their job was to make the German soldier believe that he would never sleep again. Their tactics were born from their limitations. Limitation 1. Vulnerability. The Po-2 was a massive, slow, flammable target in daylight. It would be shot down in seconds by any fighter, or even by ground fire. Solution? Fly only at night. Total darkness was their armor. They became nocturnal, sleeping in shifts during the day, living and fighting in the world of pure black. Limitation 2. Low altitude. The Po-2's service ceiling was low, and its engine labored to climb. Solution? Weaponize the altitude. They flew below German radar. While heavy bombers were tracked from miles away, the witches flew on the deck, sometimes just meters above the ground, hopping over trees and hedgerows. They were invisible to German early warning systems. They simply appeared over the target. Limitation 3. Low speed. The Po-2 was a snail. Solution: use low speed for accuracy. A modern jet bomber screams over a target at 500 miles per hour, releasing bombs from 30,000 feet, relying on computers. The night witches would approach the target at 70 miles per hour, at an altitude of only 1,000 feet. The navigator could literally see the whites of the eyes of the German soldiers. They didn't need complex bomb sights. They looked over the side of the cockpit and dropped the bombs by hand. Their accuracy was terrifying. They could drop a bomb into a command tent, a single truck, or a specific gun emplacement. But their masterstroke, the tactic that elevated them from nuisance to psychological terror, was the idle glide. A German-held position would be on high alert. Sentries would be listening.
Searchlight crews would be scanning the skies, but they were listening for the sound of an engine. The Night Witches developed a three-plane attack pattern. Two planes would approach the target, drawing the attention of the searchlights and the anti-aircraft flak guns. As the Germans tracked these two decoys, a third plane would fly to a position above the target. Then, the pilot would do the unthinkable. She would reach down and switch off the engine. In the frozen night air, the only sound was that soft, whispering whoosh of wind over canvas. The plane became a silent glider, a ghost. It would glide in total silence, the crew lining up their target in the darkness. Only when they were directly overhead would the navigator release the bombs. The first thing the German soldiers knew of the attack was the explosion that killed them. Only after the bombs were away would the pilot restart the engine. That sudden, rattling pop, 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 shattering the night after the attack was the signal that the witch had already struck and was now escaping unharmed back into the blackness. This tactic was devastatingly effective. It turned the plane's worst feature, its pathetic engine, into its most terrifying weapon. German soldiers, in letters home, described this experience with primal fear. Wrote one Landser, "We cannot understand the Soviet tactics. We are told they are subhuman, yet they fly planes we cannot see, we cannot hear. We are always on edge. Sleep is impossible. To lie in a dugout and listen to the wind, wondering if it is the wind or if it is her, this is a special kind of madness." They were not just dropping bombs. They were dropping terror. The bombs themselves were small, often just 50-kilogram fragmentation bombs, but the volume of attacks was unhuman. Because the Po-2 was so light and slow, it could land and take off from anywhere. They didn't need airfields, a patch of grass, a farmer's field, a stretch of road just behind the front lines was their base. They would land, rearm, and refuel in less than 5 minutes. A typical German bomber crew might fly 1, perhaps 2 sorties in a night. The Night Witches flew 8 to 10, sometimes more. On the busiest nights, some crews flew 15 sorties before dawn. It was a relentless, non-stop conveyor belt of harassment. As soon as one wave of explosions faded, the whoosh of the next wave would begin. They were a swarm. They were gnats that stung like hornets. And the German war machine had no idea how to stop them.
At first, the German High Command, OKW, refused to believe the reports. Frontline dispatches from 1942, particularly from the 17th Army in the Caucasus, were dismissed as combat fatigue or mass hysteria. A German staff officer's report from July 1942 reads, "Troops report nightly harassment by low-flying, obsolete biplanes. These aircraft appear to be piloted by women. They employ silent glide tactics that are proving highly detrimental to troop morale. Recommend increased flak and night fighter patrols." The response from Berlin was one of derision. Women flying crop dusters? This was Soviet propaganda designed to make the Wehrmacht look foolish. But the reports kept coming, and the damage reports were undeniable. Fuel dumps were exploding. Ammunition depots were vanishing. Command staff cars were being hit with pinpoint accuracy. Most importantly, reports of desertion, self-inflicted wounds, and psychological breakdowns were spiking in sectors serviced by the 588th. The Germans, masters of technological warfare, scrambled to find a countermeasure. Every logical solution failed. Countermeasure 1. Anti-aircraft flak guns. This was the standard defense, but the Po-2 was a phantom. Problem A. Altitude. Flak guns were timed to explode at preset altitudes, usually thousands of feet up. The witches flew below the minimum fuse setting. The shells would scream past them and explode harmlessly above their heads.
As one pilot, Nadezhda Popova, recalled, the flak looked beautiful, like fireworks. We would fly through it, counting the holes in our plane the next morning, sometimes 40, 50 holes. We would patch them, sing, and fly again. Countermeasure 2. Searchlights. The Germans formed rings of powerful searchlights around key positions. The plan was to catch a witch in the beams, blinding the pilot and allowing the flak to destroy her. The witches adapted instantly. They began flying in pairs. The first plane would deliberately fly into the edge of the searchlight beam, acting as a decoy. As every searchlight and every flak gun on the ground swiveled to track this target, the second plane would slip in, undetected, from a different angle, engines off, and destroy the searchlight batteries themselves. The witches had learned to hunt the hunters. Countermeasure 3. The Luftwaffe night fighters. This was the most logical and the most spectacularly unsuccessful countermeasure. The Luftwaffe assigned some of its best aces, flying the formidable Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190, to hunt them down. It was a complete, humiliating failure. As Luftwaffe Hauptmann Rudolf Hessler, a 42 victory ace, wrote in his memoirs, to be ordered to hunt the Nachthexen was a humiliation. To fail was an even greater one. They were impossible. They flew so low and so slow. To engage, I had to drop my speed to the very edge of stalling. My Bf 109 was a thoroughbred. This Kukuruznik was a plow horse. I would try to line up a shot, and this thing would just turn, disappearing into the black. I would lose it. I would spin out. I saw more German fighters crash from stalling while hunting them than I ever saw witches shot down. The Po-2's low speed was its shield. It was the ultimate expression of asymmetrical warfare. The Germans had brought a broadsword to a knife fight in a dark closet. Their superior technology was a disadvantage. The German failure was total. Their state-of-the-art interceptors, their radar-guided flak, their complex systems, all rendered useless by a group of women in wooden planes. This is the kind of hidden history where ingenuity and courage completely defy technology that we are dedicated to uncovering. These stories deserve to be told in detail. If you find this deep dive analysis compelling and believe as we do that these stories must be told, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. We have many more chapters of history's most incredible stories ready to share with you. Now the German High Command, facing total humiliation and a tactical nightmare, was about to escalate.
By 1944, the situation had become intolerable for the German High Command. The 588th Regiment, now renamed the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment for its heroism, was not just a nuisance, it was a strategic problem. Its nightly raids were tying down entire divisions of flak artillery and Luftwaffe squadrons that were desperately needed elsewhere, such as defending German cities from Allied heavy bombers. The psychological toll was immense. German generals reported that their men were trigger-happy and unfit for offensive operations after just a few weeks of harassment. The witches were effectively pinning down entire sectors of the front without ever engaging in a real fight. The OKW made a desperate, unprecedented announcement. Any Luftwaffe pilot who succeeded in shooting down one night witch would be automatically recommended for the Eisernes Kreuz, the Iron Cross, Germany's highest military honor. This order was met with shock by the Luftwaffe's aces. The Iron Cross was a sacred award given for extreme bravery or exceptional success in combat against equal foes. Now it was being offered as a bounty for shooting down a 1928 crop duster. The order had two effects. First, it cemented the legend of the night witches. The German war machine had officially designated these women in their wooden planes as a target worthy of its highest honor. Second,
It created a new class of hunter, the Iron Cross chasers. One of the most successful was Oberlieutenant Joseph Kotyuk. He specialized in ambush tactics. He would fly his modified Bf-110 night fighter, patrol a quiet sector, and wait. But even he found it nearly impossible. The witches, however, were not invincible. They were flesh and blood, flying in the most flammable machine imaginable, and the Germans finally learned. The most effective anti-witch pilot was Gerhard Grimm. He didn't try to stall his fighter, he modified his plane. He installed upward-facing cannons, schräge Musik, and in a stroke of grim genius, he stopped hunting them from behind. He would fly below them. He would patrol at treetop level, spotting the Po-2's silhouette against the slightly less black night sky. Then he would pull up underneath the witch, the one place her crew could not see, and fire a single burst from his cannons directly into the plywood fuselage and fuel tank. The witch would simply vaporize. No warning, no chance. On the night of August 1st, 1943, Grimm's squadron, hunting this way, caught 4 Po-2s in a single night. It was a catastrophe for the regiment. 8 women, 8 close friends, were killed in minutes. The witches mourned. They wept. They held funerals for empty coffins, and they wrote letters to the families of the dead. Then they painted "For Our Comrades" on their bombs and flew that very night. Their resolve was harder than German steel. The Germans, for their part, could not understand this enemy. They captured one pilot, Nadezhda Popova, though she later escaped, and their intelligence officers were baffled. She was young, intelligent, and utterly defiant. A captured German officer's interrogation report later read, "They are not fanatics. They are not monsters. They are young women who believe they are defending their homes. They show no fear. They fly without parachutes because they believe in their mission more than their lives. This psychology is problematic. It is harder to break than a concrete bunker." Despite the Iron Cross bounty, the kill count for the Luftwaffe remained pitifully low. For every witch they shot down, a dozen more would fly the next night. The Iron Cross hunters became a dark joke in the Luftwaffe, a fast track to either a medal or a fatal stall. The witches, meanwhile, continued their work, tallying their own victories not in planes shot down, but in German soldiers denied sleep.
The combat statistics of the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment are difficult to comprehend. They sound like propaganda, but they are verified fact. The regiment flew from June 1942 until the end of the war in May 1945. They flew every single night for 3 years without pause. The only nights they were grounded were nights of extreme blizzards or fog, and even then, their commander, Bershanskaya, often authorized volunteer missions. A typical sortie. A 2-woman crew, a pilot and a navigator, would take off from their muddy field. They would fly 30-40 minutes to the front line, navigate in total darkness, drop their small bomb load, around 150-200 kilograms, and fly back. Total time, 90 minutes. They would land, mechanics would swarm the plane, 5 minutes, refuel, rearm, get a new target map, take off again. They repeated this cycle all night long, 8, 10, 12, sometimes 15 times per crew. The regiment's commander, Yevdokia Bershanskaya, never flew a combat mission. Her job was harder. She had to stay on the ground, listening as her daughters flew into the flak.
Her only tools were a radio receiver she could not transmit and a signal flare. She would stand by the runway all night, every night, until her last plane was home. The life they lived was as harsh as their missions. They lived in tents, barns, or hastily dug bunkers. Their mechanics, also all women, worked in the open in sub-zero conditions, servicing engines with bare hands that would stick to the frozen metal. They had no comforts. They cut their hair short because washing it was a luxury they couldn't afford. Their uniforms were hand-me-downs from male units. But they maintained their identity. They used their navigation pencils for eyeliner. They would scavenge silk from German supply parachutes to sew proper underwear. And they famously painted flowers on the sides of their bombers. This was not frivolity. It was defiance. It was a statement. We are women, we are killing you, and we are doing it with flowers on our planes. The sheer numbers accumulated by this single 50-plane regiment are staggering. Total sorties flown, over 24,000. Total bombs dropped, over 23,000 tons. This is a disputed figure, with some estimates closer to 3,000 tons. But even 3,000 tons delivered 200 kilograms at a time testifies to the sheer number of sorties. Nights of continuous combat, 1,100. Total hours flown, 28,676. They destroyed or damaged 17 river crossings, 46 ammunition depots, 86 enemy firing positions, 12 fuel depots, 9 trains, 2 railway stations, and 76 German staff cars, a favorite target. They caused 811 fires and 1,092 major explosions. They did this with a plane designed to dust crops. But this success came at a terrible cost. The regiment was a close-knit family. The 2-woman crews lived together, flew together, and often died together. When a plane was hit by a German night fighter, the result was always the same: a sudden, brilliant flash in the sky, and then nothing. The regiment lost a total of 32 pilots and navigators, 32 sisters who flew into the dark and never returned. In return for this sacrifice, the Soviet Union showered them with honors. The 46th Guards Regiment became the most decorated female unit in the entire Red Army. 23 of its members were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest possible honor. The Germans had offered their highest medal to kill one of them. The Soviets gave their highest medal to 23 of them for surviving.
The war ended in May 1945. The 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment flew its last mission over Berlin. They had flown from the gates of Stalingrad to the heart of the Reich. And then, almost immediately, they were disbanded. The Soviet Union, victorious in war, reverted to its pre-war cultural norms. The heroes of the Red Army were celebrated, but the heroines were quietly encouraged to return home, to be mothers and wives, to forget the unwomanly business of war. For decades, their story was suppressed, forgotten, treated as a footnote or a curiosity. The male military establishment, in all countries, was not comfortable with the legacy of the night witches. Why? Because the witches had proven something deeply unsettling to the doctrine of modern warfare. They proved that technology is not a guarantee of victory. The Wehrmacht's advanced night fighters and radar-guided flak were defeated by plywood, fabric, and courage. They proved that asymmetric warfare could be shatteringly effective. They were the ultimate low-tech solution to a high-tech problem. And most profoundly, they proved that gender was irrelevant in the cockpit. They had not just equaled the performance of male regiments. In many categories, sortie rate, accuracy, and sheer relentless endurance, they had surpassed them. They flew in weather that grounded male units. They took risks that others would not. They did it all while battling not only the Germans, but the condescension and sexism of their own side. The male pilots, who had mockingly called their planes sewing machines, were silenced. One Red Army infantry captain, interviewed after the war, summed up the feelings of the men on the ground. "We loved them. We called them sisters. When we heard that pop, pop, pop overhead, we knew the Germans would be catching hell and we would be safe. They were the bravest souls I ever saw." The legacy of the Night Witches is not just a military one, it is a human one. It is the story of how a group of young women, armed with obsolete tools and facing an overwhelmingly powerful enemy, weaponized their own intelligence. They turned their weaknesses into strengths. They turned silence into a weapon, and they turned a 1928 crop duster into a symbol of terror that haunted the dreams of an entire army. Today, in a museum, a Polikarpov Po-2 hangs from the ceiling. It looks fragile, absurd, a relic from another age. It's hard to imagine it as a weapon of war. But then you read the words of a German veteran, Hans von Luck, who faced them at Stalingrad. "We simply couldn't believe that the Soviet airmen who caused us such trouble were in fact women. These women, they were fearless. They came night after night in their slow biplanes, and we could do nothing. They were ghosts, and they were our nightmare." The story of the Night Witches is a powerful testament to courage, innovation, and resilience. But what part of their incredible story stands out the most to you? Was it the psychological terror of the idle glide tactic? The fact they flew without parachutes simply to carry more bombs? Or that they turned a slow, flammable crop duster into a weapon that baffled Germany's high-tech military? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. We read every one.